Hello and welcome. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright is a complex 9-issue series written and drawn by Bryan Talbot. The series itself began in 1978 in the underground British comic book Near Myths. From the beginning, Luther Arkwright was intended to be a graphic novel told in an ongoing episodic format, which made it unique at the time since comic book stories didn't usually build towards a definitive conclusion. Talbot worked on Luther Arkwright until 1982, and then the project was discontinued with only half of the story complete. 5 years later, in 1987, Talbot would get the opportunity to finally complete the Luther Arkwright epic for Valkyrie Press, a publishing company that had been originally set up to exclusively publish the comic book Red Fox. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright was the only other title they published, and, following the final issue of the Luther series, they immediately stopped publishing comics. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright would probably be an obscure title if Dark Horse Comics didn't reprint the series in 1990. This series had new covers provided by Bryan Talbot, and the original artwork had word balloons added to it to make it easier to read for a North American audience. And it's this reprint series that most people are probably familiar with. Now, the plot of Luther Arkwright is pretty straightforward. Luther is assigned by the good guys to stop the bad guys from destabilizing the multiverse. But, especially in the earlier issues, the story is an intentionally disjointed, jumbled series of events that are told in a non-linear manner. Scenes are mixed together and hop between multiple locations and multiple characters in a way that can seem both chaotic and seemingly random. It's not, but it has that appearance. Early on, you are required to pay attention because the series charges on whether or not you understand what's going on. By the third issue, this experimental, almost non-narrative structure evens out, and the story becomes far easier to follow and grasp. And the latter third of the series is almost entirely linear. Even though I've boiled down the plot to its simplest components, because, that's what I'm supposed to do, it's a very dense piece of work. The references and influences are numerous, and that's what makes this piece of work hard to categorize as, say, an alternate history story, for example, because that would be inaccurate. It would be more accurate to say it's an alternate histories story, since it does take place in various locations throughout the multiverse. But that also doesn't take into account the mystical and arcane elements of the story, nor does it hint at the obvious influences of Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion concept, or the storytelling methods of Robert Anton Wilson, particularly the Schrodinger's Cat trilogy. I mean, Luther Arkwright is a rabbit hole that one could easily spend a significant amount of time exploring, but I'm not going to do that here. That's a hole you need to visit on your own. I will mention that the more you know about British and European history, apocalyptic myths, and mysticism with a focus on tantric sexual practices, then the more you will probably get out of the story. Furthermore, if you prefer an adult narrative that allows room for analysis and discussion, then you will enjoy Luther Arkwright. For me, and I'm speaking about my own preferences, there are two specific things I don't really care for in the series, both of which occur in the 6th issue. The first thing is stream of consciousness writing. While appropriate to the sequence, I find the style to be tedious to read, and, for me, I really have to put in an effort to not skim words, or to look ahead to see if there's a goddamn point to the text. And the second thing is a resurrection into a Christ-like person. Although I have to admit, it had a unique reasoning to it, and it wasn't strictly Luther coming back as the savior to redeem everyone's souls. No, the resurrection, or more accurately, the transformation of Luther, occurred because he stopped resisting death and accepted it into himself. And that's what triggers his resurrection. Also, when Luther does return, he's basically an avatar of death. Sure, he's motivated to save the multiverse from collapsing into entropy, but that requires a lot of people dying for that to happen. Again, both of these points are my personal biases. Critically speaking, they were both well done and appropriate to the story. So, feel free to ignore what I just said. Overall, The Adventures of Luther Arkwright has the intent to elevate the medium and to explore its potential. It has an attention to detail in both art and story that is compelling. As such, it is an early example of comic books as literature.